Thank you. Please be seated. Let's have the jurors brought in, please.
Jury's all present. Count for your order.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Bailiff. Please be seated. Okay, we're back on the record on case CR 22-21-1624, State of Idaho versus Lori Vallow. The state's continuing presenting its case in chief during the jury trial. The jurors are all present and accounted for. I believe have all also signed their juror affirmation for the day. Is that correct?
Yes, Your Honor.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Bailiff. Again, thank you to the jurors for your continued service and for continuing to follow that admonishment each day as we break for the day. At this time, the court notes the prosecution is present as well as the defendant and the defense. The witness, Dr. Christensen, was testifying yesterday and was previously placed under oath. I will remind the witness you are still under oath. The state completed its direct examination, and I believe we would be starting this morning with cross-examination. Would that be you, Mr. Thomas?
I'll be doing that, Judge.
All right, Mr. Thomas, if you'd like to start your cross-examination at this time, you may.
Thank you. Morning, Dr. Christensen.
Good morning.
So, I believe you testified on direct examination that you went to medical school at the University of Virginia, but you didn't really disclose where you did your undergraduate work. Where'd you do that?
I did my undergraduate degree at Brigham Young University.
BYU?
Yes.
Okay. And what year did you graduate from undergrad?
1986.
Okay. And then I believe you said you went to Walter Reed Medical Center. Where is Walter Reed at?
Walter Reed Army Medical Center is in Washington, D.C. That's where I did my internship training in pediatrics.
And at that point, were you a hospital-based pathologist at Walter Reed, or was that somewhere else?
That was subsequent to that. I initially did pediatric training for 1 year at Walter Reed. Then I spent 3 years working for the Army as a flight surgeon and general medical officer. I was also the chief of the Department of Primary Care at Fort Huachuca for 2 years. And then subsequent to that, did training in anatomic and clinical pathology.
So you went into the Army after medical school, is that right?
Yes.
Okay.
Technically, before they paid for medical school, I was a reservist while I was in medical school.
Oh, okay. You described a little bit about what pathology is, and that it basically, you take fluid samples or tissue samples or autopsies, and you look at those and try to find if there's any type of disease or natural process, or what is it about pathology? Is that right?
Yes, that's a good description.
Okay. And specifically, you said in order to become a forensic pathologist, first you have to go through, be a board-certified anatomic pathologist?
That's correct.
And what is an anatomic pathologist?
Anatomic pathology is what you train in your regular anatomic and clinical pathology residency. It's learning to diagnose cancers. It's learning to, learning lab medicine and all of those things. But anatomic pathology specifically is focused on the examination of disease in tissues.
Okay. All right. And in this particular case, there was a death certificate that was issued, and you reviewed that death certificate as part of this case study?
I did.
Okay. And what was the findings on the death certificate?
I believe it was the cause of death was certified as cardiac arrest due to pulmonary edema.
Okay. And your findings were inconsistent with that death certificate?
Are different from that. Certainly, as I explained yesterday, pulmonary edema is not really a cause per se. You can have pulmonary edema and not die, and it's something that results from multiple causes of death, but it's not something that without further explanation is an adequate explanation for why a person died.
And you talked a little bit yesterday about pulmonary edema being that frothy substance that was on the outside of her mouth. Is that correct?
Yes, that is one manifestation of it. It's primarily a process in the lungs, but it does sometimes manifest externally like that.
Okay. And are you aware as to whether or not that frothy substance was ever collected and tested?
My understanding was not.
Okay. Is that something that would normally happen?
No.
No. So if somebody's brought into your what do you call it? It's not a medical clinic, right?
The medical examiner's office.
Medical examiner's office. When somebody's brought into your medical examiner's office and you open up, unzip the bag, and they have that frothy substance, does that just get cleaned off and doesn't get tested, doesn't get looked at?
It gets documented in terms of photography. We take pictures of it so that we have documentation that sit there, but there's no testing that would be done on it. I don't know what testing you would do on it.
Well, I guess my thought might be, and I'm most likely wrong. I have been before, and this is not a super exceptional circumstance. But my thought process would be that maybe there were some poisons or something in the frothy substance that might be able to be tested.
I don't know that you could collect enough of it to test. Most lab testing requires minimum sample volumes, usually on the order of at least a milliliter, and usually that froth is not anywhere near that volume that would be there. And there are better samples to use from an autopsy, tissue or blood.
Okay. As part of the autopsy process, is it normal for you to examine the mouth and inside the mouth?
Yes.
And did you do that on this particular case?
Yes.
Even after the embalming process where I think they sew up the mouth. Is that right?
They generally will put a wire through the upper and lower jaw to hold the jaw in place, yes.
Okay. And you remove that and you examine the mouth?
I actually don't recall specifically that, but I would assume so.
Okay.
I don't have a specific recollection of that, but that would be a routine part of the process.
Was that documented in your report?
In the report, no. I would have to look at the photograph. Photographs would probably document that.
Okay. The photographs that we had earlier that were presented to you yesterday didn't show any of that, right?
They did not, no.
Okay. X-rays are generally taken, you indicated. Were X-rays taken on this particular case?
They were.
And was there anything out of the ordinary with those X-rays?
No.
Okay. And when you got to your conclusions as to the cause of death being asphyxia, you explained that asphyxia is basically when a person is deprived of oxygen. Is that right?
Yeah, inability to have enough oxygen, inability to breathe normally. Yes.
Okay. And you indicated that a couple of those different ways to do that, or 3 different ways to do that, would be drowning would be an example of asphyxia.
It would. Mm-hmm.
And hanging would be an example of asphyxia.
It could be, yes.
And that there was some sort of a chemical asphyxia, like a carbon monoxide poisoning or something that would inhibit the person being able to breathe.
Yes.
All right. And you also indicated that asphyxia was a diagnosis of exclusion?
Yes.
All right. And so in this particular case, you did X-rays, didn't find anything abnormal. You did internal and external exam, didn't find anything abnormal. Is that right?
Correct.
So, and I'm more than likely I am oversimplifying this, but when someone has a seizure, you indicated that it was some sort of a brain response. Is that right? Tell me a little bit about what.
Yeah, a seizure is abnormal electrical activity in the brain that can manifest in a variety of ways.
Abnormal electrical activity in the brain. And so once someone has passed, that brain activity obviously ceases, right?
Correct. Mm-hmm.
And so there's no way to really restart that or to check to see what abnormal electrical issues there are in that particular person, right?
Yes, that's correct.
So kind of like a car, when you have a car and it has a dead battery, you don't know if there's something wrong with the engine or not because you can't start the car. Does that make sense?
I suppose, yes. Mm-hmm.
All right. And so with this particular case, with Tammy's death, you're not sure what happened as far as if there were any seizures, if that caused any type of other electrical abnormalities that could have caused her death, right?
I'm not sure what you mean by unsure. I think it's very unlikely that happened.
Okay.
So.
And the unlikeliness of that happening is based on your review of her medical records and her past history?
And clinical medical experience with, just the nature of new onset seizures in someone of her age, yes.
And when you say nuances of seizures, you indicated that she was on, I believe it was fluoxetine?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
And is that a generic version of Prozac?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Okay. And isn't it true that Prozac, one of the long-term side effects of Prozac includes seizures?
It probably does.
All right. And so if there's a possibility of seizures as part of her medical regimen, and her husband indicated to the medical examiner, and which was in her reports and whatnot that you reviewed, saying that she had seizures. Would that make it possible that she may have passed from a seizure?
Again, there are many things that are possible. I cannot absolutely exclude that she had seizure activity, but I just think it's very, very unlikely.
Okay. But the truth of the matter is that you really didn't do any tests on this dead body because there was no electrical activity going on in the body. Right?
Well, there are no tests that you can do to document seizures after someone has died, but we did have a neuropathologist examine her brain, which was revealed to be completely normal.
Right. And tell me a little bit about that neuropathologist. Who was that?
His name is Dr. Andrew Guajardo, works in our office.
Okay. And how long has he worked with you?
He's been in our office since 2019.
Okay. And in your experience as a medical doctor and as a pathologist, have you ever worked in this particular field, the neuropathology?
I am not a neuropathologist, no.
Right. But was it part of your study or part of your training?
Yes, it is.
All right. So you knew what he was doing, and did he just explain it to you, or did he show you? I guess I don't really know what he did. Did he take the brain out and slice it open and pull it apart and look at it?
Yeah, we remove the brain as part of the examination. We then preserve it in formaldehyde for a period of time, and then he subsequently did an exam for which I was present. And he then does a thorough examination, takes photographs, and generates a report as well.
Okay, so you saw him do what he did.
Yes.
Did he cut the brain open?
Yes.
Okay, and did he take samples out of that brain?
Yes.
Okay, and from where about in the brain did he take those?
I would have to review the report. I would imagine from the hippocampus and other places, but I don't know without referencing the report specifically. I don't recall.
Okay. Do you have your report with you?
Yes.
Would you like to review that?
If you'd like, sure.
Sure, go ahead.
So he took sections of both hippocampi.
I'm sorry, you can't really review. You can review the report and then you have to put it back. I'm not trying to be a jerk, but
That's fine.
that's just how it works.
So he took sections of both hippocampi, of the medulla, of two portions of the cortex of the cerebrum, and the basal ganglia, I believe, and portion of the cerebellum.
Okay. And where would he have been looking for seizure activity in that dissection of the brain?
So he's not looking for seizure activity. What he's looking for in those sections of brain are anatomic abnormalities that are associated with seizures.
Okay. So it's possible that he could have missed something.
Possible.
Okay. And it's possible that she died of a seizure of natural causes, right?
Possible.
Was there anything in the medical records that you reviewed or any of the collateral reports that you reviewed that may have talked about Tammy's use of vitamins or essential oils or other homeopathic type remedies?
It was mentioned in a couple of places that she did use those in different ways. I don't have any indication as specifically how she used them. In the photographs that were taken by the coroner at the scene, there were many essential oils and other non-pharmaceuticals that were present at the scene, which we went through and listed and looked up to see what they were.
Right. And so when somebody has a history of using those things, I mean, it's possible to overdose on some vitamins or some essential oils, right, and die from that?
There is nothing you can't overdose on, given enough of it, yes.
Okay. Specifically, vitamin A, one of the side effects of overdosing on that is death. Is that right?
Yes, but that's a long-term process. I'm not aware of any situation where someone would die acutely from vitamin A toxicity. I've seen that actually before in some people, but it generally is people that take too much for an extended period of time. It leads to liver failure.
Okay. And did you review this for any type of vitamin poisoning?
We didn't see any evidence of it.
Okay.
So, I mean, specifically, we did not test for vitamins, no.
Didn't test for it. Did you test for any essential oils or any essential oil type poisoning?
No, I'm not aware of any testing available for that.
Okay. Okay. You did a lot of testing for poisons, right?
Yes.
And that's basically because she had such a, I don't want to say normal, but normal autopsy. I mean, it was hard to find a cause of death, right? That's why you kind of lean towards poisoning. Is that right?
That's certainly part of the reason, yes. Mm-hmm.
Okay. All right. You tested for some heavy metals?
Yes.
And what was the purpose of doing that?
Heavy metal poisoning can lead to death.
Okay. And you specifically sent it to a chemical lab that you have in Utah?
Yes.
What kind of a chemical lab is that?
It's part of the Utah Public Health Lab. It's what they call a chemical threat response lab that is involved in monitoring for both bioweapons and chemical weapons agents, among other things.
Do many states have that?
I actually don't know how many states have that.
Okay. But your state has it, Utah has it. Is that because of the Twilla Army Depot and the chemical weapons?
I'm not aware of the history of it or why it's there.
Okay, all right. Then you sent some stuff off to the National Medical Lab Services, or National Medical Services Lab in Pennsylvania, is that right?
Correct, yes.
And is that just a big lab that services all over the country?
Yes, it is a reference lab for forensic toxicology testing as well as other clinical testing, and they do some crime lab things as well. I think they do DNA testing. We don't use them for that, but they're a very large forensic toxicology reference lab.
Okay. Let's talk a little bit about your review of the external body of Tammy Daybell. Some of the bruising was significantly more severe, I guess, than some of the other bruises. Is that right?
I don't know that I would characterize it that way.
Okay.
Certainly, some of it in the sections that we reviewed yesterday showed more hemorrhage than other areas, but they are all relatively, superficial, you would say, or they're tissue injuries, on the with the surface and the immediate, underneath tissue. They're certainly not in any way a lethal injury or anything of that nature.
So when you say a serious hemorrhage, they weren't. I guess I'm just saying there was one that you looked at that had the surface of the skin, and then there was a significant amount of black substance. I'm assuming it's blood.
Yes.
Underneath that, in that fatty tissue. Is that right?
Yes.
You recall the one that I'm thinking of?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
All right. And some of the other ones that you pulled were more closer to the skin, which means they had less hemorrhaging that went, I guess it went less deep. Does that make sense?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
All right. So in order for something like that to happen, would it be consistent with someone falling or hitting something or being hit with something, or would it be more consistent with fingerprints or somebody holding someone down?
Yeah, I think, as I said yesterday, those types of blunt injuries generally are non-specific as to there's nothing I can look at any one of those individual injuries or even collectively and say, this is caused by this. They're not specific as to what caused them. I can tell you they're consistent with this or that or the other thing. And to answer your question specifically, could you fall down and sustain a bruise like that? Sure.
Okay. What, if anything, makes them consistent with your cause of death being asphyxia?
Just their location and the number of them and their age by looking at them microscopically.
Yeah, and let's talk a little bit about the age of these. You said once the area is hemorrhaged and you have that breaking of the blood vessels, then you said that there is a period of time where nothing happens, and then there's a period of time where white blood cells kind of attack that area. Is that right?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
All right. So tell me a little bit about the attacking of that area to heal the body or whatever. How long does that take?
It can begin as quickly as a couple of hours. It can take a day or more in some cases, and there's not really any way to know exactly where on that spectrum any individual injury is. But until you see inflammatory cells, you know that at most you're looking at several hours.
And when you looked at these particular, I can't remember what you called them. Did you call them slides? Or what did you call them?
Slides is what I ended up looking at, yes.
Okay. And you looked at them underneath a microscope?
That's correct.
Okay. And there was no cell activity where it looked like they were trying to, the white cell activity looked like it was trying to heal?
No, there was no inflammatory response in any of them.
Inflammatory response. Okay. You specifically talked a little bit about the time of death and how you really couldn't estimate the time of death. The prosecutor asked you if this would be consistent with happening prior to if the call was made at 6 o'clock, prior to 5:40 a.m., and you really couldn't give us a definite answer on when this time of death was, right?
Well, I believe I said specifically that it's unlikely to have occurred, around 5:30 or close to the time of her discovery if she's already stiff at that time.
Okay.
But beyond that, is it 1 hour, 3 hours, 5 hours, 10 hours? I can't tell you.
Okay. So it's possible that Tammy had been lying dead in her bed for a number of hours prior to her discovery?
That's certainly possible.
Okay. Did you happen to review in your study of this particular case a forensic pathology report from Raven Pathology Associates?
Yes, I believe I did.
Okay. In that particular report, she had a different result than what you had, right?
I believe so, yes.
Okay. I'd like to show that if the witness, what we've marked as defendant's, I believe, E. I'll just withdraw it. I'm going to withdraw that question, Judge.
Okay.
All right. Okay, no further questions. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, thank you, Mr. Thomas. Redirect examination?
Just briefly, Your Honor.
Very well.
Dr. Christensen, you were asked if your findings differed from that of the original death certificate or the coroner. They, in fact, did differ, correct?
They did.
And is part of that because the cause of death listed on that certificate is not actually a cause of death?
It's not an explanation for why someone would die, yes.
But you did, in fact, see signs of pulmonary edema. Is that correct?
We did, yes.
So in that sense, that at least that finding was similar. It's just the coroner had listed that as the cause of death when in fact that is not the cause.
Correct. I mean, she might have listed, as she did, cardiac arrest due to pulmonary edema, but then it would require an additional line of explanation due to something else, due to heart failure, due to drowning, due to drug overdose, due to asphyxia, whatever. It's pulmonary edema is an insufficient explanation for why someone died.
And similar with cardiac arrest, and I'm going to forget the terminology that you used yesterday, but they are essentially a symptom or a result of the actual cause of death.
Correct.
And I think we'd talked about this yesterday as well, but a coroner is very different from a medical examiner or forensic pathologist, correct?
Just in training, yes. Mm-hmm.
But you have significantly more training?
With respect to death investigation, yes.
And coroners are not required to attend medical school?
No.
They're not required to attend all the training that you attended?
No.
In addition to that, coroners, generally speaking, do not perform autopsies.
They do not in most cases.
And in performing the autopsy, does that assist in your determining a cause of death?
It does.
Does it assist in your determining the manner of death?
It does.
You did, I think you previously testified, you've been asked a lot today by defense about seizures and if that could be a potential cause. I believe you testified yesterday when you're looking at a negative autopsy, there are a limited number of causes that you're generally looking into.
That's correct.
Okay. And again, one of those causes could be seizures.
Yes.
Can you go over again, why in this case did you determine that the seizure was unlikely, or what exactly was your determination with regard to seizures?
Sure. So with respect to seizures, seizures in the setting of a negative autopsy, the most normal finding in a brain, for example, of somebody with known seizures, is a normal brain. So if I have somebody come to my office with known seizures who has died in their sleep, or has died of a witness seizure or something like that, when I look at their brain, most of the time, most people with idiopathic epilepsy have normal brains. So a normal brain in and of itself does not exclude seizures as a possibility, and she certainly had a normal brain. However, the primary things in this case that I think in my mind have mitigated against seizure as a possible cause of her death are her age and lack of history. It was discussed that there was some recent history perhaps of seizures, but I could find no indication that had been evaluated, looked at medically, or in any way was concerning enough to have evaluated. New onset seizures with a normal brain in a 49-year-old is quite unusual.
And you were also asked about intoxicants. Is that, and again, just for the benefit of the jury, that is one other cause of death that could result in a negative autopsy?
It is.
And in this case, I believe you said you did, or there was one of the most extensive testing procedures done that you've ever been involved in.
Yes.
And I believe you were asked, did you consider potentially that this was a death from some kind of an intoxicant?
Yes, I mean, certainly that's one of the reasons we did all the testing we did. We were concerned that it was. And I think, as I mentioned yesterday, there's not an ability ever to totally exclude any possible substance, simply because the amount of testing that would be required to do that would be generally more than you even have samples to do the testing for. But the testing that we did excludes, hundreds and hundreds of possible substances, both, as I said, over-the-counter, illicit, and therapeutic medical substances, as well as a number of other toxins. And could there be something else? Certainly, but it's just very, very unlikely given the amount of testing that was done.
And in this particular case, you did rule out intoxicants as a likely cause of death. Is that correct?
Yes. And
what was the reason for that?
Just, again, the exhaustive nature of the testing that was done, and no indication that there was something else that we hadn't covered.
And you were asked about those bruises again, and again, for the benefit of the jury, in looking at them and taking the samples, what were you able to determine with regard to a time of when those may have been inflicted?
So yes, they are acute injuries, again, with no inflammatory response, meaning they have occurred, sometime from right around the time of death to as many as several hours beforehand. But generally, it would be very, very unusual for them to be more than a day, and quite unusual for them to be more than 12 hours old with that finding.
And while you can't say for sure, did those bruises appear to be consistent with someone being restrained?
They are certainly consistent with that.
And the autopsy is just one part of the investigation you conduct, is that correct?
That is correct.
So part of your investigation and your expert opinion is based on external information provided?
It is.
You were asked again a little bit about the time of death, and did you review information regarding when the death was reported?
Yes.
And did you review information regarding what was reported in relation to the state of Tammy's body at that time?
I did.
And was the information you reviewed that she was cold and stiff?
Yes.
What would that lead you to believe as far as how far before the call she may have passed away?
Sure. So there are two parts to that. The cold part, if a body has cooled substantially, a person who's interacting with that body, we are used to interacting with each other at normal body temperature. And so any substantial decrease in a person's temperature is going to be perceived as cold. And whether that's, a few degrees or 20 degrees or whatever it is, it's really difficult to draw many conclusions from just an assessment of cold, other than that they have probably been dead for a while and their circulation has stopped. And so putting a time on that is not really possible based on cold. Based on stiff, again, rigor mortis is a process that develops over time. It's generally not there at all. When a person first dies, they remain flaccid for a period of time, and then become stiff in the ensuing 1 to 2 hours generally is when it starts, and will stiffen further to the point of where they're maximally stiff somewhere usually around 12 hours, and then that stiffness will persist until the body begins to decompose. So to answer your question, generally, if someone is described as stiff, again, that can be a variable thing, but at a minimum, at least an hour probably has passed since the person died.
And you were asked if she could have been laying there dead.
Yes.
In your experience, or would you be able to determine would you expect a dead person to roll out of bed?
Not without some external force applied. So there are a number of scenarios that I have seen over the years where a dead body has moved. Generally speaking, that is in the setting of decompositional changes, where the body is actually changing shape and configuration because of bloating and other postmortem changes. That does not happen in the early postmortem period. And a person who is, recently deceased would not be expected to move on their own without the application of some other external force.
And again, based on the autopsy and then the investigation you conducted, what did you determine to be the cause of death?
Asphyxia.
I have nothing further.
All right, thank you, Ms. Blake. That will conclude the testimony then of this witness. Let me inquire of the state, is the witness allowed to be released from any subpoena?
Yes, Your Honor, we would request he be released.
We have no objection.
All right, with no objection from the defense then, Dr. Christensen, thank you for your testimony. You can be excused. The bailiff will help assist you out of the courtroom. All right, is the state ready to call another witness?
Yes, Your Honor.
Who will that be?
Detective Bruce Mattingly.
Very well. Sorry, I interrupted the clerk for just a second here. Yeah.
Do you solemnly swear or affirm the testimony you're about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
Thanks. All right, Detective Mattingly, how long has it been since you testified?
More than a few days.
Okay, more than a few days. Let me just inquire before you testify again. Have you reviewed any of the trial testimony since you last testified?
No, I have not.
Okay, thank you for that. With that in mind, then, you've previously testified, so please adhere to the same rules we gave you the first time around. And with that in mind, the state can commence with the direct examination when you're ready.
Thank you. Detective, I know you previously spelled your name, and I may have missed it. Did you just spell it again?
Yes. Last is Mattingly, Mattingly.
And again, I know you've testified before today, but I'm going to go over a few more things with you, or a few things that you may have already gone over, just to refresh the jury's recollection on some of it. Where are you currently employed?
Fremont County, Idaho.
How long have you been employed with them?
22 years.
What is your current title and/or position?
Detective.
How long have you held that position?
About 6 years.
What other positions have you held within that agency?
I've worked as a detention deputy, patrol, a school resource officer, and then into a detective position.
And were you in fact working as a detective there on October 19th of 2019?
Yes, I was.
Did you receive a call regarding an unattended death?
I did.
And did you learn who the decedent was?
Tamara or Tammy Daybell.
Do you recall, and actually I'll back up there, do you know why you were called regarding that unattended death?
Yes, the Deputy Greenhall had been called out to an unattended death in our county, and as for our procedure, she's to call a detective to talk about the death and to see if a detective was needed.
And were you on shift that day?
I was not.
Were you the on-call detective?
I was not.
Did she tell you why she ended up reaching out to you?
She did. She did try.
I'll object, Your Honor, to hearsay.
I'll sustain that objection.
That's fine. Based on what she reported to you, did you end up responding out?
I did not.
Did she report that she found anything suspicious?
She did not report anything.
Do you know if other individuals responded out?
No other deputies, no.
Do you know if the coroner responded out?
The coroner did respond, yes.
At some point, did you learn of a prior incident that had been reported regarding Tammy Daybell?
I did. Deputy Greenhall, in her explanation of what was...
And I'll object, Your Honor, to hearsay.
That I'll overrule at this point.
So Deputy Greenhall, in helping me understand the location and past circumstances, had told me about a prior event on October 9th, 2019, to where Deputy Cannon had responded out there for a suspicious call of, I believe it was a paintball gun that had been pointed at Tammy.
Had you been involved in that investigation involving the paintball gun?
No.
At some, actually, let me back up there. Do you know if additional investigation was conducted into the death of Tammy Daybell on October 19th?
No, there was no additional on that date.
At some point, was additional investigation started into the death of Tamara Daybell?
Yes, there was.
Do you know if the Fremont County Sheriff's Office was involved in that?
They were.
Did you personally become involved in that investigation?
I did.
Do you recall when you became involved?
Yeah, I started around mid-December of 2019.
Do you know if the Fremont County Sheriff's Office had already been involved at the time you personally became involved into that investigation?
Yes.
And had they been?
They had been.
Do you know approximately when Fremont County became involved in that investigation?
They started that investigation about the 1st of November.
I'm going to back up a little bit. Do you have any specialized training in order to be a peace officer?
I do.
And what is that?
So I attended the Post Academy or Police Academy, and from there I have my certificates of basic certificate, intermediate certificate, advanced certificate, and master's certificate. And then from there I also have specialized training as a detective and in death investigations.
When you became involved into the death investigation regarding Tammy Daybell, do you know if there were other related investigations being conducted?
There were several.
And do you know what those were?
Yes. Besides ours, there was Rexburg PD and the FBI were searching for Tylee Ryan and J.J. Vallow, the missing children. And in Arizona, there was Brandon Boudreaux's attempted shooting in Gilbert, Arizona, and Charles Vallow's death in Chandler, Arizona.
Would it be fair to say that this became a joint investigation?
Yes,
Did you also assist in the investigation involving the missing children?
I did.
And focusing on the investigation involving the death of Tammy Daybell, did you review statements that had been made by Chad Daybell regarding the deaths, the circumstances surrounding the death of Tammy?
I did, yes.
Did you also review statements Chad Daybell had made regarding Tammy's health?
Yes.
Did you do any further investigation regarding looking into Tammy's health?
I did.
And what was that?
We got a search warrant for Seasons Medical, Teton Medical, and Walmart Pharmacy.
And Your Honor, I think previously the state had submitted the business record certifications for a couple different exhibits, but the exhibits themselves had not been admitted. They're admitted by stipulation, is my understanding. So I have State's Exhibit 38A, which is the Teton medical records, 39A, which is the Walmart pharmacy records, and 40A, which is the Seasons medical records, that I would ask to be, I believe they've maybe previously been admitted, but only the certificates were submitted to the court. So I would ask to submit those, and just to make the record clear, ask that they be admitted.
Okay. Let me inquire of the defense then on 38A, which is the Teton medical records. Teton Health?
Yes, Your Honor.
Was there a objection to the admission of 38A from the defense?
Your Honor, I'm sorry, I don't have that in front of me. Is 38 the certificate of authenticity?
I
So-
think it's the corresponding exhibit, and 38 was the certificate, and 38A would be the report itself. Is that right?
That is correct, Your Honor. It would be the medical records.
I've previously not objected to the certificates of authenticity under Rule 902 of the Idaho Rules of Evidence, and so if that's attaches to that exhibit, then I don't have any objection.
Okay. So that's on 38A. On 39A, which would be the Walmart pharmacy records, I believe, being offered. Any objection on that, Mr. Archibald?
No, Your Honor.
And then on 40A, seasoned medical records, any objection there?
The same inquiry, just to make sure that the certificates have been previously admitted.
Okay. Before those are offered to the witness, then perhaps they could be shown to the defense to make sure they correspond to the...
And Your Honor, at this juncture, the state does not intend to publish them to the jury. We just wanted to admit them. I will have some questions regarding them if the defense wants an opportunity to review them.
Okay. Would you like to review them, Mr. Archibald, or just move forward?
If the witness is going to be testifying about them, then yes, I'd like to see a copy.
Okay. Let's have them shown to the defense then, Ms. Blake. Thank you.
It's just a disc. Are they previously?
And I don't know, is the defense okay with me starting with some questions and then determining if you want to take a break to review those in more detail?
Yes.
Okay. We'll do that then. Since they're not being published, if there's some concern raised, I'll allow the defense to maintain a provisional objection there.
Thank you, Your Honor. And in looking at those medical records from an well, let me back up. Did you actually review those medical records?
I did.
In your review of those medical records from an investigative standpoint, did anything stand out to you?
No, nothing stood out as far as what we're looking to cooperate for information such as seizures or seizure-like activities, fainting, or dizzy spells.
Did you see anything in the medical records that indicated that Tammy had any issues with fainting?
She did not.
And I'll object, Your Honor. Foundation.
What's the foundation for that?
And Your Honor, I think I previously asked the witness if he looked at the medical records and just from his investigative standpoint, if anything stood out to him, and that goes to what he does next in his investigation. So I think the medical records speak for themselves, but this is his review of those and how it assisted or pushed his investigation along.
All right. The objection's overruled. You can continue, Ms. Blake.
Did you see any indication that Ms. Daybell had any dizziness or dizzy spells?
None.
Did you see any indication that she had any seizure-like activity?
She did not.
Did you notice anything with regard to her having low blood pressure?
There was no low blood pressure reported.
So from your review of this, did it corroborate statements made by Chad Daybell?
No, they were completely opposite.
And what, if anything else, did you do with regard to looking into Tammy Daybell's health?
From there, we had just reviewed some pictures from the crime, from the scene of Tammy's death, and found that there was a Fitbit on her nightstand. And so we looked into getting a search warrant from Fitbit for information that Fitbit could possibly have, such as heart rate, sleep patterns, and her activity levels.
And did you end up actually obtaining documents from Fitbit?
I did, yes.
Did you personally review those responsive documents?
I did.
And from your review of those, what, if anything, did you discover?
So the Fitbit warrant, the information that came back, we were able to identify it as her account, Tammy Daybell's. And from there, even though we were hoping for heart rate and sleep patterns, because of the device that she had, those were not recorded. But what was recorded were her step counts and her level of activity.
And I'm going to ask that the witness be handed State's Exhibit 108A. These are just slides that are attached to a PowerPoint. I previously have given defense a copy. There's a copy for the court, a courtesy copy for Your Honor, and if the witness can be shown the other one. Detective, could you look at those pages? Did you assist in preparing an exhibit today in preparation for your testimony?
Yes.
Do those slides or those photos appear to be an accurate depiction of the information put into that PowerPoint?
Yes.
And would that aid in your testimony today?
Yes.
Your Honor, I would move for the admission of State's Exhibit 108A. I would indicate what the court has is just the printouts. The actual exhibit is on a jump drive.
Any objection?
No, Your Honor.
All right, Exhibit 108A is admitted.
And I would request permission to publish.
You can publish it.
And Detective, does the information on the screen look familiar to you?
Yes.
And where have you seen that information before?
That would have came from our search warrant from Fitbit.
And with what we're seeing on here, were you able to identify or determine who the Fitbit belonged to?
I was. We used her email at tammy.daybell@gmail.com, her information that she had entered.
And did you look at other things to verify that this device was Tammy's?
I did. Another thing that we looked at was who her friends were that she had listed, and a few of them were her children, Leah, Emma, and Seth Daybell.
And you talked about wanting to look at the heart rate in relation to this information that was recovered. I believe you indicated you were unable to obtain that information. Do you know why?
As I understood, it was because of the device which she had. As you can see up there, it's the Alta device, right about there. And that's a low-end model which shows a heart rate as it's being used, but it does not record the heart rate.
And you also indicated that you were looking to see if she wore it to bed. Were you able to make any determination regarding that?
Yes, it looked like she very rarely wore that to bed at night. Every so often, it looked like maybe she fell asleep with it, but it didn't stay on.
And was there a reason that you were focused in or hoping that she had worn it to bed?
The reason we were looking for that was so that we can narrow down that time of death.
You said that you did discover some information on the Fitbit, though. What is this next slide showing some of the information you recovered?
It is, yes.
And what are we looking at on this?
So that's the total amount of steps per month that Tammy had taken for the year of 2019.
Did you do anything to determine if that was a significant amount of steps per month?
I did. Just because the numbers looked big to me didn't mean that they were accurate or how active they were. So after a review of what the national average was for steps, I was able to look at these numbers and determine whether she was below average or she was average or above average.
And what was your determination ultimately?
So I found in the month of January and February she was a little bit below average, but from March up through October she was above average.
And to be clear on this slide, would that be January of 2019 that we're looking at the bottom?
That is correct, 2019.
So from the bottom to the top is the order it goes in.
Yes.
And again, what was the date, or the day, I should say, that Tammy was reported as deceased?
The report came in on the 20th.
And would the October data then be missing part of the month?
It would, yes.
So that would have been from the 1st of October up until the time of her passing?
Correct.
And was the death reported on the 19th of October?
Yes.
And that was of 2019?
2019, yes.
So from your review of this data, what did you determine with regard to how active Tammy was?
Tammy was very active up until the time of her death.
At any point in your review of this data, I think you said some of the first months start out a little lower. Did you see any slowdown in her activity in the months leading up to her death that seemed significant?
There was no slowdown.
I think you may have said, but did you also speak with coworkers, neighbors, and others regarding Tammy's health?
I did.
What, if anything, did you learn from speaking with, from interviewing other individuals?
I'll object, Your Honor. That question calls for hearsay.
Sustained.
Through your investigation, did you find anything to support that Tammy was having health issues?
I did not.
Did you determine whether or not she was involved in clogging or other fitness classes?
I did, yes.
And was she?
She was. She was involved in Zumba, which is a high fitness class, a clogging class, and she had been preparing for a 5K, and which she did complete.
Do you know approximately when she would have completed the 5K?
It was just before school started.
In 2019?
In 2019, yeah.
And as part of the investigation surrounding Tammy's death, do you know if it was determined whether or not she had any life insurance policies?
She had two.
And did Fremont County Sheriff's Office do anything in relation to those policies?
Yes, we obtained 2 search warrants.
And did you do you know which companies she had life insurance through?
She had 2 life insurance. One was through Primerica, and the other was through LifeMap.
Were those the companies that the search warrants were sent to?
They were.
Did those companies in fact provide responsive documents?
They did.
And did you review those responsive documents?
I did.
And Your Honor, I have what's been marked as States 122A and 151. Again, these are documents in which there were business record certifications, and it's my understanding would be admitted by stipulation.
All right, 122A has been offered. Could you identify what those are specifically, Ms. Blake?
Yes, 122A is going to be the business record certification for Primerica and the corresponding documents. And 151 is going to be the life map document.
All right, on 122A, does the defense have any objection to those being admitted?
If I could see the exhibits.
Yes, Your Honor. Your Honor, I also have that States Exhibit 152 and 153, which are attached to the life map documents. 152 would be the beneficiary statement. 153 would be the employer's and or administrator's statement.
All right, we'll allow defense counsel to review these for a moment.
I have reviewed them, Your Honor. I don't have any objection.
Okay, so Exhibit 122A is admitted. Exhibit 151 is admitted. Exhibit 152 is admitted. Exhibit 153 is admitted.
And Detective, focusing in on first on the Primerica documents, did you in fact learn who the insured was on that policy?
Yes, on the Primerica, there were two insurers. It was Tamara Daybell and Chad Daybell.
And do you know who the beneficiaries were?
Beneficiaries were the same.
So each of them had a policy or were listed on the same policy as both insured and beneficiaries of each other?
Yes.
Were you able to determine from a review of those documents how much the policy on Tammy was for?
$300,000.
Do you know if that $300,000 was paid out?
It was.
And who was it paid to?
Chad Daybell.
And with regard to the life map, were you able to determine who was insured under that policy?
That was Tamara Daybell.
And do you know who the beneficiary was?
Chad Daybell.
Were you able to determine an amount on that policy?
$80,000.
And do you know if that amount was in fact paid out?
Yes.
Do you know who it was paid to?
Chad Daybell.
And do you know on that life map policy if there was an additional $50,000?
Yes, there was.
And the total payout on that one would have been $130,000?
That would be correct, yes.
But the $80,000 was a little separate from the $50,000.
Yes.
If I can have just one moment.
Yes.
I don't have any further questions, Your Honor.
All right, thank you, Ms. Blake. Thank you. Mr. Archibald, cross-examination.
So, Detective, with your investigation into Tammy's death, did you learn that the defendant, Lori Vallow Daybell, was in Hawaii at the time of Tammy Daybell's death?
I did.
Did you also learn that that Lori Vallow Daybell's device was not on the property of Chad Daybell on October 9th or on October 19th, 2019?
It was not.
Now, these medical records that you reviewed, do you recall what kind of medications Tammy Daybell was taking?
She was on tramadol and, pardon the pronunciation, but fluoxetine.
Do you know what those medications are for?
Tramadol, I believe, is for pain, to help treat pain, and the fluoxetine is for depression.
And in reviewing the medical records, were you able to determine what type of pain Tammy Daybell had?
I just know it was in reference to a pain in her wrist.
And in your investigation, you learned that she was taking medication for depression. Do you recall how long she had been taking that medication?
I don't remember the exact year or how long she had, but it had been for a few years.
And was it something that she had an active prescription for?
Yes, it was.
In reviewing the medical records, could you determine if she was also in any kind of counseling for depression?
No.
In reviewing this Fitbit information, it appears as if she was taking about 10,000 steps a day. Is that fair to say? Sometimes more, sometimes less.
Correct.
Okay. And then the 5K run, would that have maybe been in August of 2019? Because that was a high month.
It could have been. I don't know when it was specifically.
Now, in your investigation, you also learned that Tammy Daybell, what she did for a living. Is that right?
I did.
What did she do for a living?
She worked at the school, elementary school, as a librarian and something with computers.
And so, during your investigation, you learned that she was active at her job as a librarian or as a computer teacher.
I did.
Anything in her school personnel file, anything in there that would that stuck out to you?
There was nothing.
She was a good employee.
She was highly spoken of.
And on the insurance payouts to Chad Daybell, was this life insurance something that had been applied for years prior to 2019?
On which one?
Well, you tell me how long these insurance policies had been in place.
So the Primerica, that one they had established many years prior to even moving to Idaho. They had that when they were living in Springville.
And is that the 300,000 one?
That is the 300,000. Yes.
Okay. Go on.
And then Life Map, that was one provided by the school. And she
That was
only
the
been
80.
to
I'm sorry. That was the 80,000 one.
80,000 plus the 50, so 130,000.
Okay. So the Primerica had initially started. That insurance had started in Utah
Yes,
before they moved to Idaho.
correct.
And then the Life Map was just part of her job insurance.
It was.
So any activity on that insurance that had begun in, say, 2018 or 2019.
On the Life Map there was.
And what was that?
So she had previously worked there part-time, and then when she worked full-time, she was eligible for a certain max amount. And then after a year or more of working there, she was eligible for, I believe, 5 times the amount of her yearly salary, and that's where the price increased.
Okay. And 5 times the amount of her annual salary, would that have been the 50,000?
I'd have to review some notes. I don't know.
Did she make about 10,000 a year as a school librarian?
Close to that.
Any indication from your investigation that the life insurance company wanted their money back for fraud?
That was discussed.
Did they take any action to get their money back from Chad Daybell?
I don't recall if they did or not.
So not as far as you know.
I can't remember.
If that would have happened, you would have known about it.
More than likely, yes.
All right, thank you, Detective.
All right, thank you, Mr. Archibald. Any redirect?
Your Honor, may we approach briefly?
Yes. All right, Ms. Blake, before we get started again on any further redirect, we needed to, a little housekeeping matter for the record on exhibits. Exhibits 38A, 39A, and 40A were, you moved to admit them, you were going to question about them, and then you did. We never actually formally admitted those into the record. I didn't hear any objection come up from the defense during questioning, so unless there is an objection at this time, I'll just indicate on the record that exhibits 38A, 39A, and 40A were admitted, and those were the medical record information.
Correct, and the pharmacy.
Okay, so those are admitted. All right, with that in mind, Ms. Blake, if you want to continue with any redirect, you may.
Thank you, Your Honor. Detective Mattingly, you were asked some questions regarding whether or not you knew if the insurance company was conducting an investigation or looking into fraud.
Yes,
And I believe you indicated you're not sure what the insurance company is doing at this juncture.
correct.
Are you aware whether or not Mr. Daybell does in fact have charges pending for insurance fraud?
I can't recall if there is or not.
You don't recall if Fremont County, if he has pending charges in Fremont County for insurance fraud?
Correct.
Just one moment. And you indicated that to the best of your knowledge, the insurance companies did pay out
Correct.
And those payments went to Chad Daybell?
They did.
Do you know, through your investigation, did you learn whether or not the defendant was living off the proceeds of of those insurance funds while in Hawaii with Lori Vallow?
Yes,
And was he?
he was.
I have no further questions.
All right, thank you, Ms. Blake. All right, I believe that'll conclude the examination of this witness then. Detective Mattingly's previously been brought back. Is he still going to continue to be available under subpoena for the state?
I believe he should be able to be released at this time.
Okay, any objection to that from the defense?
No, Your Honor.
Okay, thank you for your testimony today, Detective. You can be excused.
Your Honor, the next witness for the state will be Alice Gilbert.
Okay, thank you.
Do you solemnly swear or affirm the testimony you're about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
All right, before we commence with examination, let me just ask you, Ms. Gilbert, since this trial started and it's been going a while, have you reviewed any of the testimony that's taken place in this case during trial by either viewing it from another location or here, or by accessing it on the internet or reading about it in any way?
No.
Okay, thank you for your response. With your testimony then, please talk directly into that microphone so we make sure to pick up your voice on the record, and also make verbal responses to any questions you're asked so that the record's clear, and try to avoid speaking at the same time as anyone questioning you. And with that in mind then, Ms. Blake, once you're ready, you can commence with your direct examination.
Thank you, Your Honor. Would you please state your name and spell it for the record?
Alice Gilbert, ALICE GILBERT.
Not too close. You're okay. These microphones can be a little touchy, so we'll just get used to it as we go through things. Do you know Chad Daybell?
Yes.
Did you know Tammy or Tamara Daybell?
Yes.
How did you know them?
We moved into the ward 2017, so into the neighborhood too. I was working with Tammy in our church calling.
And when you talk about the ward in your church, what church are you referencing?
The LDS church.
And did you say when you moved into the neighborhood?
2017.
And Chad and Tammy were already living there?
Yes.
Would you say that you were closer to one of them over the other one?
Yes.
And who were you closest with out of those two?
Tammy.
And excuse me, but I believe you said you and Tammy shared a church calling.
Yes.
And what calling was that?
I was the Relief Society president, and she was the first counselor.
How often do you think you saw Tammy?
We met once a week for meetings, and then on Sunday.
And had that continued for quite some time?
Until she passed away. Mm-hmm.
And do you recall when the two of you were given the calling?
In October of 2018.
So for about a year, you saw her approximately twice a week.
Right.
Did you get to know Tammy pretty well?
I think so.
And tell us a little bit about Tammy.
Tammy was a great person. She was shy. She didn't like to be in the limelight, but she was very organized. She knew the computers very, very well. Whenever we needed to change anything, she could do it quick. She knew the computers really good. Whenever we planned an activity or so, she would say, let's keep it simple. Just keep it simple. And it seemed to work. That seemed to work how we did it. And honestly, I think that's how she lived. Keep it simple.
Did you have occasion to observe Chad and Tammy together?
Yes, I did. Just at church, mostly.
And what did you observe?
Well, at first they were normal. It was great and normal. Sometimes he would come to help set up the chairs for the activity that she would be over, and he would help that way. In 2019, it kind of changed. Not that he was more distant to her. So that was noticeable. Yeah.
And you said that was in 2019? Mm-hmm. Did Tammy ever talk to you about her marriage?
No, she never said anything about it. She did one time tell me her finances were a little strained, but she didn't talk about it with us.
And when you would see Tammy, did you notice her slow down at all?
No.
Did you notice any change in her activity level prior to her death?
No, in fact, I think it increased.
Did she ever complain to you about any health issues?
No.
Did you ever see Tammy have any shaking fits?
No.
Did you ever see Tammy faint?
No.
She ever tell you that she did?
No.
At some point, did you learn, let me back up. How did you learn about Tammy's death?
The morning of the 19th, 7 o'clock, Emma called me on the phone, and she was just sobbing. And she told me that her mother had died, and I said, what? And I said, what happened? And she said she died in her sleep. And
I'm going to object to hearsay. This is all hearsay.
I'll sustain that at this point.
At some point, did someone take the phone from Emma?
Chad did.
And what did Chad tell you?
He told me not to tell anybody and to wait for about an hour. And I said, well, I need to call the bishop. And he said, no, don't call. But I still did.
And to be clear, was that on October 19th of 2019?
Yes.
At some point that day, did you end up going to the Daybell residence?
Yes, we went over about 8:30 in the morning.
Did you make observations of Chad when you arrived?
Yes, he met us at the door, and he gave me a hug, and all the children were there, and their spouses, except for Mark. And the children were stunned. They were all on the couch and chairs, and they could hardly speak. They were stunned at this. But Chad was not stunned. He had to tell us. I said, what happened? And he said, well, we think she died of an embolism. And he said that her legs were hanging over the bed, and that she fell out of the bed, and that she got up at midnight and vomited, and the kids didn't say anything, and they were I think they were too stunned to talk.
Did it surprise you to hear Chad's explanation of her death?
Yes, because I had just seen her Wednesday. I had just talked to her on Wednesday.
And how did she seem on Wednesday?
Fine. She was fine.
Did she complain to you at all that day of any health issues?
No,
Did you ever hear her have a coughing fit around that time?
no.
After initially going to the Daybell residence, what else did you do that morning?
So I asked them if they had breakfast, and they said no. And then my husband and I said, well, we'll go get you breakfast. And as we stood up to go, Chad told me that the funeral is going to be on Tuesday and the memorial on Wednesday. And I was really surprised, and I looked at him. I said, oh, did you plan this? Because, sometimes a husband and wife will say, if I die before you, I want, a graveside or do this. I said, do you plan this? And he said, no. But I knew somebody planned it.
And did that seem awfully quick to you?
Yes.
And so the funeral was going to be on a Tuesday and the memorial on a Wednesday,
Yes.
and she was pronounced dead on a Saturday.
Yes.
Did Chad respond when you asked if he'd already planned the funeral or if they'd talked about it?
He just said no, and that's all he said. But it did catch me off guard. It did surprise me.
Did you, in fact, end up attending the funeral?
Yes. I had to go see her in the casket. Sorry.
You're just fine.
I had to tell her goodbye. And she looked good.
And where was the funeral?
In Springville, Utah.
Did you ever ask Chad why the funeral was being held in Springville instead of where they resided?
I didn't. I just assumed because they used to live there. I didn't. I was surprised because I would think that the kids would like to go visit her grave, and they, if she was very close, or they could go visit. But then they used to live in Springville, so I didn't ask him.
When you were at the funeral, do you recall making any observations of Chad?
He was standing by the casket. I told him that Tammy looked good. And he just said, yeah, she does. It wasn't really mournful to me, but I didn't know how he was reacting to things, So we went to the funeral. Was a really nice funeral. It was. And I was really amazed. The kids all spoke, and they did a good job. And I was surprised that they could pull it together so fast from the death, and then it would take a day to drive there and to talk. So I was amazed. They gave some really nice talks. Tributes to her.
And do you recall if Chad also spoke at the funeral?
He did. He spoke last.
And did you make any observations regarding his talk?
He gave a good talk too. Maybe more like a church talk than a spouse would speak about their mother spouse.
And after getting back from the funeral, did you end up attending the memorial service?
No, we didn't go because we had just been to the funeral, and so our Relief Society presidency and the bishop fixed a meal, and we took it over to Chad's after the memorial.
And when you took it to Chad's house, was he there?
Yes, they'd just gotten back, and the kids were back, and so we put the food down, and the kids started to eat. And Chad said then that he was moving out. He couldn't be there. And we said, well, where are you moving? And he said he's moving to Rexburg. He had a friend there that had a condo, and that his friend was hardly there, so he would let him stay there.
And the memorial was on Wednesday?
Yes.
And so by Wednesday, Chad was telling you he was going to move out of his residence?
Yes.
Were you left with an impression of if the friend was male or female?
He called him a he. Chad called him a he.
So you believed it to be a male friend that he would be
Yeah.
moving with? Did anything else strike you that morning as far as anything Chad told his kids?
Yes, he told them to go through Tammy's things that afternoon, which I was surprised at.
Did you observe how the kids seemed to react to that?
They were eating, and they seemed to go along with it, not really question him. So I think they went ahead and did that.
In the time after Tammy's death, did you have an opportunity to observe the Daybell children?
Yes. So I went Friday to go check on Emma and Garth, and I stopped in to see Emma. She was really struggling. She was crying. She'd missed her mother. I was also struggling having contact with Chad. I said, what's wrong? And she said that he didn't want anything to do with her or her siblings. And then I checked in at Garth. They lived right kitty-cornered from each other. So I checked in on Garth, and he said that he was hoping he wouldn't lose his dad,
Yeah,
too.
I'm going to object to this as hearsay.
Sustained.
Were you able to observe how they appeared?
Emma got real sick, and she lost a lot of weight. We took a lot of meals to her, and the school district was taking meals in to both her and Garth. Garth and Seth were living in the house.
And when you say in the house, were they living in Chad and Tammy's house?
Yeah, they were. And I went over and cleaned Tammy's house for her, took her a meal, but she struggled health-wise that way.
At some point, did you end up reaching out to Chad?
So it was about a week, and my husband and I thought, well, we could call him to see how he's doing, maybe go visit him. So we called him and said, can we come and visit with you? And he said, no, but I'll come to your house. I'll come over and see you. So we said, okay.
And Judge, I'm just going to inquire when the court wants to take a mid-morning break, just so I can gauge how far to go.
Okay, let's go ahead and do that now. I think it's a good time for that if you still have a ways to go on your direct. So, all right, thank you, Ms. Blake. We'll take a break here for roughly 20 minutes, so try to get started again no later than 11:45.
All rise, please.
Thank you. Please be seated. All right, Mr. Bailiff, we could have the jurors brought back, please.
please. Jury's not present. Time for your honor.
All right. Thank you. Please be seated. Okay, Ms. Blake, you can continue on your direct examination. I'll remind the witness you're still under oath. Go ahead.
Thank you, Your Honor. And just for the benefit of the jurors, I think before we left off, you were talking about reaching out to Chad to check on him.
Yes.
And what do you recall the content of that conversation, or what was discussed?
We reached out to him to go visit him to see how he was doing. And I think this was the 26th of October. And he said he would come to our place.
Did you get the feeling that he didn't want you to go to the residence he was at in Rexburg?
I'm going to object. That's speculative, Judge.
Sustained.
Did he, in fact, end up coming to your place?
Yes. He came over to our place, and it was, I'd made cookies, and he came in and sat in the kitchen. We asked him how he was doing, and he said, actually, I'm doing really good. And that he'd met the woman he was going to marry, and
you recall this being around October 26th? And Tammy had just passed away or been declared dead on the 19th?
yes.
Did you find, did it surprise you that he seemed to be doing so well?
Yes, we were shocked. And he went on to say how beautiful she was, and we asked him where he'd met her, and he said at a conference in St. George in October. And we asked him her name, and first he wasn't going to tell us, and then he said, well, I'll tell you. And he said Lori Vallow, and I had no idea thinking, who's Lori Vallow? And then he mentioned that she did a podcast with Melanie Gibb. And so then that's who that is.
And then you had some name recognition?
Yes, just knowing that she had done a podcast with Melanie Gibb.
Had you ever met Lori Vallow?
No.
And when Chad was talking to you, you said he indicated they'd met at a conference in St. George in October. Do you know if that would have been October of the previous year in 2018?
Yes.
Was she with him when he came to visit you on that occasion?
No.
Did you end up actually meeting her in person?
Yes.
Do you recall when that was?
Yes. So on Tuesday nights, we worked at the temple, and we were waiting in a room for a meeting to begin, and he tapped us on the shoulder and asked us to step in the hallway. And there we met her and her niece, Melanie, and another friend. And it was brief because we had to get back into the meeting, and so it was just brief, but it was a little awkward. It was awkward.
And then at some point, did Chad and Lori both end up coming to your house?
Yes, so in that week, so I honestly, I don't know if it was the next day or another day, but it was in that week. And they came to the house in the afternoon, and it was cold, and so I asked her if she was used to Idaho weather, and she said she'd bought some warmer clothes, and they came in and sat on the couch and was quite affectionate with each other.
And when you say quite affectionate, could you describe a little bit about what you were observing?
It was abnormal for us to see Chad that way. So, his arm was around her. He had his arm over her legs, and she was giggling and laughing. And for Todd and I, for my husband and I, we were embarrassed just because we hadn't seen Chad in a thing that way. Especially, they look like teenagers, and so. Anyway, so I asked her about her family, and she said that I asked her if she'd been married, and she said yes, that her husband died in December of a heart attack. And then Chad said, and she recently just lost a daughter. So I told her, oh, I'm sorry. And she said, thank you. And I said, how many children do you have? And she's kind of stammered, and like there were stepchildren involved, and so I did not get a definite number.
And when, and you talk about you hadn't seen Chad act like that before. Mm-mm. Was Chad like that with Tammy?
No.
And you talked about you'd ask Lori if she was getting used to the cold. Was there a specific reason that you remember asking her about the cold?
Yes, because October of that year, 2019, we had an extreme frost in Rexburg at the time. And it was early frost, and it was a hard frost, and the farmers were getting their potatoes out early. And in fact, they were helping each other. It was an unusual hard frost, and so it was cold that October. And so I asked her if she was getting used to the cold then.
And when you talk about it was potentially the next night or sometime that week, are you referencing the week of October 26th of 2019?
Yes.
Did that seem pretty quick to you to see Chad there with another woman?
Absolutely. Yes.
And when Chad told you that Lori had a daughter that had died recently, or that she'd recently lost a daughter, Lori didn't say anything different?
No.
She didn't contradict that information?
Mm-mm.
Did they ever talk to you about their plans for a future together?
Yes. First Chad told us he was going to go to Hawaii to write a book. And then they mentioned that they eventually were going to get married, but they didn't know when that would be. They mentioned they were going to take the kids to Disneyland around Thanksgiving.
And when they talked about taking kids to Disneyland, do you know which kids they were referencing?
It would be Chad's children.
Did they ever mention taking any children of Lori's with them?
No, I had the impression that she had no other children, that she was like an empty nester. And I thought that the daughter that had died was like an older daughter, maybe of cancer or illness or something.
And did Chad or Lori provide you any details as to how Lori's daughter had died?
No, and I didn't pursue that question with her.
And I think previously we talked a little bit about you going to visit Emma And was it Emma that you would go clean her house?
Yes.
At some point, did you learn about or receive information regarding some missing children?
Yes, when I stopped to see Emma, she had told
Judge, I'm going to object to hearsay.
Yeah, anything she says specifically would be hearsay, so that is sustained.
Did you learn anything regarding some missing children?
I heard on the news from Nate
Again, objection, hearsay.
That would also be hearsay.
At some point, do you know if Chad left Idaho?
Yes. I knew that they had left after they visited with us. I think they left when I stopped to see Emma.
Objection, hearsay.
Comment wasn't made yet, so I'll overrule that at this point. Ms. Blake, just if you'll re-ask the question.
At some point, and maybe I'll ask it this way. After Lori and Chad visited you and you'd had the conversation about Lori's children or lack of children, did they come to your residence on another occasion?
Yes. It was after they were married, and they'd come back to Idaho. They were going to take the kids to Disneyland. They did stop by and show us wedding pictures.
Do you recall approximately when that visit would have been?
It was close to 2 weeks. It was close to 2 weeks after they had been there the first time.
And at that time they showed you wedding photos?
Yes.
Were you surprised to see wedding photos?
Yes.
And why was that?
Just because it was so soon. They had gotten married so soon.
And you were friends with Tammy?
Mm-hmm.
At some point after that visit, did Chad end up coming to your residence?
Let's see. No, I think that's when they left for Disneyland. I do know that through that time they had visited other neighbors and gone to the school. He came earlier in February and visited with us.
And later in February of the following year?
No, 2019.
And just Chad had come over on that occasion?
Yes.
And that was while Tammy was still living?
Right.
What do you recall, why does that particular visit stick out to you?
Because we were fixing a bedroom floor, so I was busy. It was a mess, and so I was fixing the floor, and he came over to visit, and so I was still fixing in the bedroom, and he was going to leave, and I walked to the door with him, and he stopped at the door and paused and said that he'd had a vision of Tammy, that her time on earth was coming to an end, and that it was fulfilled, and he didn't know how or when, but he didn't see her living past the age of 50.
And that was in February of 2019?
Mm-hmm.
And again, when you had met with Chad Chad the first time, he'd indicated he met Lori in October of 2018?
Right.
At some point, did Chad come to your residence and ask if he could move in?
Yes. After Lori was arrested in Hawaii and was brought back to Idaho, and he came shortly after and asked, he said it was too crowded at his place and he couldn't live there, and he wondered if he could live in one of our spare bedrooms. We told him we had a daughter that was coming to live with us. So no.
And did he visit you other times as well around that same visit?
It was when the bond hearing was set for Lori. He came to our place shortly after and asked if we would put our property up for bond. And I said, well, he mentioned another man's name. He said, he can't help me. I said, what about your family? No, my family can't help me. We told him we would think about it. And he left. The next day, I think that was a Saturday. The next day was Sunday, and he texted us and said that he had a bondswoman to come and talk with us. And we told him, well, we were still thinking about it. And
We're going to object as to relevance. We don't believe that this is in furtherance of any conspiracy.
What's the relevance, Ms. Blake?
Your Honor, I can ask a different question.
Go ahead.
At some point, did you and Chad have a conversation regarding the comment he had made to you previously about Lori's daughter dying?
yes. So when he asked us to do this bond, I felt like because you're asking this of us, I'm going to ask you some questions.
Again, Judge, we're going to object to relevancy.
Ms. Blake?
And Your Honor, maybe I'd ask for a sidebar.
Okay.
And Your Honor, I think there was a pending objection. The state will withdraw our question
Okay, go ahead, Ms.
and ask a different way. Not getting into the context of why Chad was there or the other conversations, what, if anything, did he say regarding his prior statement that Lori had a daughter that had lost a daughter recently?
I asked him, I'm going to say this right. I did ask him how many daughters she did have. And I said to him, you told me when we met that she had just lost a daughter. And he said, no, I didn't. I said, yes, you did. And so I knew that it was Tylee that he was talking to me about. I asked him also, where are they? I asked him, where are the kids, Chad? And doesn't Tylee want a life, a job, a car, a boyfriend? And he said she didn't like people and she didn't like me.
And what struck you about those statements?
Because he said didn't.
He used the past tense?
He used the past tense.
And again, without getting into the context or indicating who the person was, at some point, did you overhear Chad make a statement to someone regarding his wife and you?
Yes.
And what was that statement?
With the statement.
I'm going to object to foundation. If we don't know when this occurred, or, I think there needs to be a little more foundation.
Okay, I would agree. It needs a little additional foundation, Ms. Blake.
And the statement that I'm referencing, would that have taken place at your residence when Chad was there?
Yes.
And would it have been after he had returned from Hawaii?
Yes.
And without indicating who you heard him say that statement to, do you recall overhearing a statement regarding what he thought regarding you and his wife?
Yes, he mentioned they think I killed my wife, and the they was referring to me and my husband.
I don't have anything further at this time, Your Honor.
All right, thank you, Ms. Blake. Cross-examination?
If I could have just a second to confer with counsel.
Very well.
Mrs. Gilbert, you and your husband are farmers?
No. We have some animals on our place, but some chickens and a steer, but my husband's a flight instructor.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry. I thought you were talking about farms and potatoes. I was wondering if you were a farmer.
No, that's surrounding areas. They're in Rexburg with the farmers.
Okay. And you knew Chad Daybell because he lived in your neighborhood?
Yes.
And he and his wife and children attended the same church as you?
Yes.
And then how did you get to know Melanie Gibb?
We had heard her. I didn't know her. We just heard the podcast with her and Lori on it.
So you listened to the podcast or you did the podcast?
No, we listened.
And what kind of podcasts were those?
Well, they were upbeat and positive podcasts, and it was encouragement. It was a lot of life in the podcasts.
And was Chad Daybell involved in those podcasts?
The one that we heard, he was not.
And is it something that you listen to or something that you watch?
No, you could just listen to it.
And so do you know what Melanie Gibb looked like or just what she sounded like?
I didn't know what she looked like.
And so were you aware of what Chad did for a living?
Yes, I did know.
And did you ever read any of his books?
Yes, we had read the last series before we had moved there.
So you knew his name before he moved in as your neighbor?
Yeah.
And did you think what did you think of these books?
Well, not sure. At the beginning, he says it's a fiction. And at the end, he said it is visions that he had seen with his children in the books.
So did he indicate to you personally that these books were fiction or that they were true?
Objection, Your Honor. Relevance. And beyond the scope of direct.
It's overruled.
I didn't talk much about it with him on the books, but I'm assuming that he would think they were true.
And did you ever talk to Chad about his visions?
I didn't talk to him, more my husband did.
So were you there when they talked about it?
No, because they did it at church.
I'm sorry?
They did it at church, so I wasn't there.
Okay. Your husband and Chad would talk about his books at the
At
church.
church.
Okay. And the church, you're meaning which church?
Or our LDS church.
And did you attend we've seen maps and pictures of what's called the Salem Church. Is that
Yes.
what you're talking about? Mm-hmm. And that's about, it's a couple of miles from Chad's house.
Yeah.
And where do you live in relation to that?
We live on about 6 houses west of Chad.
Okay. And so, did you talk to Chad about the conferences that he would go to?
No, we attended one in Rexburg and one in Boise. Other than that, we didn't. My husband may have, but I didn't
So,
talk to him.
and what were those seminars called?
They were a Preparing a People seminar. There was quite a few speakers.
So one in Rexburg and one in Boise. Do you remember what year that was?
The one in Rexburg was early, so that maybe early or 2018. And then the Boise one was in 2019.
And was Chad a presenter at both of those seminars?
Yes,
And he was attempting to sell his books?
yes.
And he was giving speeches about his religious beliefs?
He talked about his books.
Did he talk about his near-death experiences?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
And what did you make of his near-death experiences?
Well, they were interesting to hear. You don't know if that's real or not. To him it was real. I can't say it was real. I don't know.
Was his goal in talking about his experiences to sell books?
I think so.
And were these seminars or conferences sanctioned by your church?
No.
Were they approved by your church?
I don't think so.
So people who go to these seminars are typically LDS people?
Oh no, they're from all over. They were from all over.
So who's where did you learn about these Preparing a People conferences?
I think we saw a brochure about it. We saw a brochure with one in Rexburg, and then also an advertisement one, I think, online for the one in Boise.
Okay. So the presenters at these seminars, conferences that you went to, what was the subject matter of that approved by your church?
No.
So if you went to one of these seminars, conferences, you were a renegade of your church?
No. They had all different types of topics that was interesting to hear. There was one that talked about the process of fossils, the universal model. There was one, a lot of it had a theme with the LDS theme, like there was one on the Book of Mormon. A lot of them talked about being positive and being like food storage, those types of things.
Would some of the topics focus on the end of the world?
I think Chad's did.
And he seemed to talk a lot about the end of times.
Yes.
And what did you make of that?
Again, it was like food for thought. You thought about it, and Some of it he would tie things into it, like what was going on in the world. So he would tie that into it. Financial things going on or disasters going on in the world. So he would tie it together.
With some of what he was teaching, would that be called strange or out of the ordinary?
Probably, yes.
Would he talk about a new church called the Church of the Firstborn?
Not in the seminars. I did not hear him talk about that in the seminars.
Did you hear him talk about that in other times?
Yes. I think in conversation with my husband, he did.
What did you make of that?
That was another part that you just listen. Sometimes you just nod and listen and you hear, all of that sounds good. But again, you have no idea. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
You don't know.
So with this Church of the Firstborn, sometimes we've heard the term splinter group. Would that be considered a splinter group of the mainstream LDS Church?
Objection, Your Honor. I think that hasn't been testified to, so I'd object to the question. And I would renew my objection that we're beyond the scope of direct and getting out of any relevance.
I think we're getting outside of the scope of direct here. I think there's some relevance with that last question. I'll sustain the objection on that.
So, did you think Chad was kind of a weird guy?
Yes, I did. But I've met a lot of weird people. So he wasn't as weird as some, but it was a little odd.
Did you look to him for spiritual guidance?
No, I didn't. I considered it his thoughts or his theories of things, but not my guidance.
And were some that you saw attracted to Chad because of his spiritual talking?
I think so.
He had a way of being convincing, even though he was selling it as fiction, but yet some people believed it.
I think so. Sometimes just the way he talked, he would make his voice and talk as if he absolutely knew things.
And is that what you observed with my client and Chad Daybell, is that she was enamored with him?
She was definitely in love with him, but I think the beliefs were the same.
And I think you described it as a couple of teenagers.
Yeah, that visit was. And I only think that because I'm older, so you would look at it like, well, I know their age, like be your age type of thing. Does that make sense?
Yes. All right. Thank you.
All right, Ms. Blake, redirect.
Thank you, Your Honor. Just briefly. Did Chad appear enamored with Lori?
Absolutely.
And Chad was more affectionate with Lori than you'd seen him be with Tammy?
Yes.
From your observation, did it appear that they had an equal relationship, Chad and Lori?
Yes.
Were they both equally affectionate with each other?
Yes.
Did they both speak openly with you?
Yes.
It didn't appear one was controlling the other one?
I don't think so.
I have no further questions.
All right. Thank you, Ms. Blake. That'll conclude the testimony of this witness at this time. If she's here under subpoena, may she be released and excused from the state?
Yes, Your Honor.
Any objection from the defense?
No objection.
All right, Ms. Gilbert, thank you for your testimony here this morning. You can go ahead and be excused. The bailiff will help assist you out of the courtroom. All right, the state can call their next witness.
The state would call Todd Gilbert.
Do you solemnly swear or affirm that testimony you're about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
All right, now that the witness is sworn, let me just inquire, Mr. Gilbert, did you listen to in any way or review any of the testimony that's occurred in this case since it started at trial?
No.
All right. While you're testifying, please talk right into that microphone. Please use an audible or verbal response to any question asked and try to avoid speaking over the top of anyone questioning you. That way we'll keep a clear record. With that in mind, Ms. Blake, you can inquire on direct examination.
Thank you, Your Honor. Would you please state your name and spell it for the record?
Todd Gilbert, and TODDGILBERT.
Do you know an individual named Chad Daybell?
Yes.
And did you know an individual named Tammy or Tamara Daybell?
Yes.
How do you know them?
Mainly, I knew that Chad was an author, wrote books, and when we moved into the area, we got to know him because of that reason. And, of course, Tammy was his wife, and so that's how we got to know them.
And was there one of the two of them that you interacted with more often?
Yes, Chad.
How often would you see Chad?
At least once a week, sometimes in the yard, most of the time, at least once a week at church.
And I may have missed it, but did you indicate when you'd moved to into Chad's neighborhood?
Oh, it was March 2017.
Did you meet Chad and Tammy fairly soon after moving there?
Yes, it was within a week.
Did you see Chad outside of church?
Sometimes, not real often, maybe mowing his lawn or something like that most of the time.
And you indicated you knew that Chad was an author. Had you read some of his books before?
Yeah, read some of them, yes.
Did Chad ever discuss his religious beliefs with you?
Sometimes he did. Sometimes we talked mainly about the books that he had written. Some of the stuff that he'd apparently, dreams and visions that he'd seen and how they related with some of the characters that was in his books.
And when you say characters in his books, was it your understanding those books were fictional?
Yes, he said they were fictional, patterned after his visions.
Did it appear that he was trying to teach you things or just share his beliefs?
At first, we was just sharing beliefs and just discussing his books. As time went on, he was pushing more that way towards teaching things towards the end there, or 2019.
And did the things that he was trying to teach you resonate with you?
If they were standard LDS church doctrine, it did. If they were not, I was kind of sitting on the fence. I don't know on that.
So you'd listen to him, but you didn't necessarily hold those
Right,
same
I
views.
didn't say usually one way or the other.
Do you recall a time in approximately February of 2019 when Chad came to your residence?
Yes.
And do you recall him making any kind of a statement that stuck out to you?
Yes, he made the statement as he was leaving that he says, I don't know if I should tell you this or not, but Tammy is, I've seen a vision that Tammy's going to die and move on before her 50th birthday.
Did you happen to know how old Tammy was at that time?
I didn't, but I figured she was around 47, 48 area, I thought.
And at some point, did you learn of Tammy's passing?
Yes. On the morning of October 19th, 2019, I would usually get up early in the morning and exercise. And so when I come upstairs at around 7 a.m., Chad's daughter had just called Alice to tell her that her mom had just passed on. And so that's when we found out about it.
Did you end up going to the Daybell residence that morning?
Yes, we went there around 8:15 to 8:30 area.
When you got to the residence, did you make any observations of Chad?
Yes, he seemed like he was businesslike, more so than someone had just lost their companion, his wife, and that things were all pretty well planned out, ready to go for the funeral.
Did that seem odd to you?
Yes, it did, because usually you're mourning more than that if your wife passes on as a surprise. Surprises you.
And you said you arrived there, and correct me if I'm getting this wrong, but around possibly 8:30 that morning?
Yeah, yes.
And so she had just been pronounced dead shortly before that, is that correct?
Yes.
Do you recall Chad making any statements to you that day or having any conversation with him?
Yes, he referred to, I said to Chad that I'd forgot all about him telling us that she was going to die until it actually happened. And so I said to him, well, man, I guess it happened. And he says, yes, it did. He turned his back away from his kids that was there so they couldn't see him, and kind of whispered that to me, that he said that, and that's probably the biggest thing that I remember that day.
And when you asked, so I guess it happened, were you referring back to the vision he'd told you about that Tammy would die?
Yes.
And you said he turned away from his kids. Did he indicate if he'd ever shared with his kids that their mother was going to die?
He did say that he had never mentioned that to them, and I don't think that they knew it.
Do you recall if he told you anything regarding how Tammy had died?
He mentioned that she had got up about midnight, had a coughing spell, and threw up in the bathroom. And she went back to bed, and he had figured that she had died around 2 a.m. He mentioned to us that he thought she had an embolism, and that she had passed away around that time, and that around 5:30, 6 a.m. that she had fell out of bed, and that he wanted Garth to come and help lift her back up upon the bed, and that she was already dead at that time.
And had you made observations of Tammy? Would you see her at church as well?
Yes.
Did you ever notice anything with regard to her appearing to have failing health?
No.
Did you make observations of Chad and Tammy together when you would see them?
Yes, when we first moved into the ward, they sat very close up to the front and was together as a family. As time went on, especially from first part of 2019, they would slowly move them back further towards the back. And so about June of 2019, they were almost clear to the back. They seemed like they were a little distant from each other from what we had noticed before, and that Chad was talking less to me about stuff, and that he just says that people that talked about preparation was kind of getting a little old, and so everybody's taking a break.
And on the morning of October 19th, 2019, did you end up leaving and coming back to his residence that day?
Which day was that again?
Oh, on October 19th, the day of Tamarad's death.
Yes, we asked them if they wanted breakfast, so we went to McDonald's and bought breakfast for them and brought it back. And at that time, there was more people that had arrived from the ward to give their condolences, and so we just left the food on the kitchen cabinet, and Gar said that was okay, so, and then we left at that point.
At some point, did Chad talk to you about not staying in his residence, that he was going to move?
Yes, after we had been to the funeral in Springville, and it was the day after they had the memorial, he did mention to us that he couldn't stay there any longer. I thought that was a little odd, and that he had a friend in Rexburg on Pioneer Road that had an apartment that he was going to move into, and that this friend was not there very much. And so it would work out pretty good for him.
Do you recall if he indicated who the friend was?
He never did say a name.
And you attended Tammy's funeral in Springville, Utah?
Yes.
Did you make any observations of Chad at the funeral?
He actually seemed pretty up-minded. We was around the casket and looked at and seen Tammy in the casket and that, and around the family, and he didn't seem real sad, I thought. For some, your wife had just passed away 3 days earlier, and he seemed like he could handle everything okay. And then in the funeral, when he spoke, which personally I thought was odd too, because mostly people don't do that when their wife dies or spouse dies, and he did show some emotions. And he spoke for quite some time, I remember. And so, yeah, he did. I would say for your wife just dying, he did a pretty good job. So.
And when you say for his wife just dying, he did a pretty good job, would you have expected him to be more emotional?
Yes, I would.
At some time after that, after you'd returned from Springville, did you end up reaching out to Chad?
Yes, I believe it was about 2 or 3 days after the memorial they had. Alice and myself thought, well, maybe we ought to call Chad, go see him, see how he's doing, see how he's getting along in that apartment all alone. And we thought we'd take him pizza. So we gave him a call, and he says, oh, no, I'll just come over and see you within an hour or so.
And he did not invite you to the residence that he was staying at?
No, he did not.
Did he, in fact, end up coming to your residence?
Yes, he came to our house about 6:30, I believe. Alice had just made some cookies, and so he was sitting there eating the cookies at the table.
And when he was there, do you recall him telling you anything?
Yes, he mentioned, we asked him how he was getting along. He said he was doing pretty good, and that he had a girlfriend, he told us, and he seemed like he was hesitant to tell us who it was. But then he mentioned that her name was Lori Vallow, and I thought to myself, well, I've heard her name before because I heard her on podcast speaking with Melanie Gibb and Jason Mao a couple of times, so I was familiar with her already. So.
And you indicated that this visit would have taken place 2 to 3 days after the memorial?
Yeah.
And the memorial was the day after her funeral?
Right.
And the funeral was 3 days after her death?
Yes.
So this is a week or a little bit more than a week after Tammy had died?
Yeah, I believe it was probably the following Saturday or Monday.
And so about a week later, a little over a week, Chad was telling you that he had a girlfriend?
Yes.
Did he say anything about his girlfriend?
He said that she was beautiful and that they were going, that she was going to be his second half of his life, I guess, wife, you might say, and for his mission that was left on the earth.
And was Lori with him on that occasion?
No.
Did you end up meeting Lori?
Yes, Chad mentioned that Lori and a couple of friends that was with her was here in the area, and if we would like to meet her. And so we worked in the temple as officiators of Rexburg Temple, and he said that they would be in the temple that Tuesday afternoon doing some work, all four of them, and so would we like to meet her?
And did you, in fact, end up meeting her on that occasion?
Yes, about 5:30 when we were waiting in prayer meeting, Chad come up and tapped me on the shoulder, and we went out in the hallway, and there was Chad and Lori and Melanie Bedreau and another lady that I'm not sure who it was.
And did you speak with them for very long that day?
Probably no more than 5 minutes or so. We didn't have much time because our meeting was about ready to start.
Ms. Blake, sorry to interrupt. Can you wait just a second? We had a little technical issue we're going to sort out for a moment. It has been. I'm not sure. Yeah, I think it's. Okay, thank you. All right, apologies for the interruption. You can continue, Ms. Blake.
I'll turn my mic on. On a later date or on another occasion, did Chad and Lori come to your residence?
Yes, I probably about 2 or 3 nights later, I can't remember, something like that. They both came to our home.
And did you have a conversation with them?
Yes, we spoke about how they were getting along and they how things were going for them, and that seemed to be going good at that point.
Did you make any observations of their interactions with each other?
Yes, probably the biggest thing I noticed was that they were, to me, it seemed like they were acting like a couple of teenagers that were first in love, and they were holding hands and sitting real close to each other, and Chad was rubbing her leg, and I just thought that was odd for your spouse just passed within a week and a half.
Had you ever seen Chad act like that with Tammy?
No.
Do you recall talking to them about their plans for a future together?
Yes, they mentioned that they would be returning to Hawaii to probably live permanently, and that Lori had lived there already in the past, off and on, and that he had a friend that wanted him to help write a book, and so that he was going to go over there and help write the book.
Did he indicate if Lori was going to go with him?
Yes, I think, yeah, yes.
Did they talk about wanting to get married in the future?
Yes, they were talking about that they would get married. The words that I remember is that when Christ told them that they would get married, that they would.
And do you recall if there was any conversation regarding what had happened to Lori's spouse?
Yes, Alice was asking her, so you've been married before, and she did mention that she had had a husband and that he had died in December of 2018 of a heart attack of their marriage.
And she indicated that he died in December?
Yes.
Do you recall any conversations or statements made regarding Lori's daughter?
Yes, we asked her if she had had any children, and she said that she'd had many, and that Chad spoke up and says that she had a daughter that just passed on, and so we didn't really ever get a straight answer of how many children she did have.
Did Lori correct him or say anything different when Chad mentioned she'd had a daughter that had passed on?
Not that I can recall.
And Lori never mentioned having a daughter living?
Not that I can recall.
Did either of them ever mention Lori having a minor son?
No.
Do you recall them coming to your residence on another occasion, a later occasion?
Yes, they made another visit before they left to go to Hawaii, and before they went to, around Thanksgiving time, they were going to take Chad's family to Disneyland in California. And at that time, they mentioned to us that they'd got married, and that they showed us all of their wedding pictures.
Did you know they were going to get married?
Just from what they'd said earlier, that they would, one of them, one day. And of course, I understand they got married November 5th, and Alice talked to Emma on November 6th, and Emma told her that
I'll
she
object, Your Honor,
was
to
married.
hearsay.
That's a hearsay statement, so that any answer there will be stricken, not to be considered by the jurors, please. And Ms. Blake, you can ask another question.
Thank you. So Chad and Lori showed you their wedding photos when they visited you?
Yes.
And when did you say that visit took place again?
It was
recall?
before they went to California on Thanksgiving time.
And that was in 2019?
Yes, 2019.
And you said they were taking Chad's family to Disneyland.
Yes, his married kids and the ones that weren't married, all of them that was there.
Did they ever mention taking Lori's kids with them?
No.
Did you ever see Chad and Lori with any children belonging to Lori Vallow?
No.
Did Chad ever tell you how his kids felt about his being with Lori?
I'll object, Your Honor. That question calls for hearsay from Chad's kids.
I ask if Chad told him, if Chad ever said how his kids felt.
Yes, the objection's overruled.
He mentioned several times that they were feeling good about it, that they were missing Tammy, their mom, but they felt good about Lori and moving on with her. He told us that several times.
Did Chad ever say anything about how Tammy felt or would feel about his relationship with Lori?
He did mention to me 2 or 3 times that she visited him in spirit and was fine with everything, and that her mission was complete on this earth, and that she was to move on, and and comfort her kids, that they were fine, or that she thought it was fine.
And after that visit around Thanksgiving in November, did Chad ever return to your residence at a later time?
I can't recall for sure. They might have come before. They did, I know, 2 or 3 times before they went to Hawaii permanently.
And when you say before they went, was that Chad and Lori?
Yes, Chad and Lori both.
So they visited your residence on a few more occasions?
Yeah, probably no more than 3 all total.
And then you indicated that was before they went to Hawaii?
Yes.
Or I think you said Hawaii permanently.
Yeah.
At some point after they'd gone to Hawaii, did Chad end up returning to your residence?
He did. After Lori had been arrested and was brought back to Rexburg, he got back. He came to our residence a day or 2 after that.
And without going into the details of why he was there, do you recall a conversation taking place regarding his prior statement about Lori having a daughter that had recently passed away?
Alice had asked him more about the kids, and I remember him commenting, she asked if Tylee, would be in college or whatever, or where she was at. And he said that she didn't really like him too much, and that she just kind of stayed away. And that's about all that I remember of that.
Just one moment, Your Honor.
Yes.
I have no further questions, Your Honor.
All right. Thank you, Ms. Blake. On cross, would you prefer to do that before or after lunch?
We can do it after lunch.
Okay. We'll go ahead and take the lunch recess at this time since it's a logical breaking point. We will go back on the record at approximately 12:45, and we can continue with cross-examination at that time.
All rise, please.
All right, I think the jurors are already starting to get lined up, it looked like, to be brought in, so we'll just remain standing. Apologies for the longer lunch break. We had a technical issue to sort out, but we're ready to bring the jurors in.